Welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin, and I'm joined by my dear friend and co-host, Dr. Sylvia Bank. Between our two households, we're navigating life with 10 children, so we know how chaotic parenting can be. As Johns Hopkins trained pediatricians, we also know the science. Our goal is to bring you the best of both worlds, medically sound, trustworthy advice, and practical, real-world insights as we dive into the trials and triumphs of parenting. Please note this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank, and I'm here with Dr. Vivian Carlin, and we are going to do our second episode in our series on food allergies. If you have not yet listened to the first one, please go back because we describe what food allergies are, what the recommendations are to prevent food allergies, and what symptoms your child may have if they're having food allergy. Today we're going to delve a little bit deeper in what food allergy looks like in your home. Personal stories from us as pediatrician moms, so you can have a feel of maybe how to manage it and honestly how stressful it may be.
Yeah, so Sylvia, why don't you start us off? Tell our listeners about your experience as a pediatrician mom with children with food allergies.
Right, so 2 of my children actually had food allergies in their infant phase, and one of them continues to have food allergy to this day. So I have the experience of how it presented and then what it's like as a parent through the years, raising a child with food allergies.
Okay, so tell us about your second child with food allergies, and then you can tell us more about how you manage this in your home.
Sure. It was really funny because when we went to that allergy appointment for my first child when he was 4, and the allergist gave us this great news that he had outgrown these allergies, the allergist mentioned at that time that it was unfortunate that my first child would have been a great candidate for this clinical study that they were starting, observing food allergy in children starting from infancy. And just as an aside, these are the types of studies that have led to the change in the recommendations over the last 20 years. And I said to this allergist, oh, well, actually, in fact, I had just given birth and have another child that seems very similar to this 4-year-old child in his food allergy profile.
Right. You're like the allergist's dream. You're like, here, I actually have one. Genetically related, right. Very similar symptoms. That's a newborn.
Right. Exactly what he's looking for. And we actually then enrolled my second child with food allergies into this clinical trial at Hopkins studying food allergy over time.
Okay, yeah, so tell me about that child. How did you come to think that he had food allergies as an infant? Tell me about what that looked like.
Sure. At this point, this child is actually my third child, so I have a lot more comfort level with parenting, and after the experience with my first child, honestly, a higher level of comfort with food allergy too. And this child, like my first child, did present with pretty severe eczema, in that weepy, open wound, oozy eczema that we were pretty sure at that point was probably food allergy too. And this baby was very young at that time, so pretty much got linked in to this allergist and this food study right away, even before we consulted our pediatrician for recommendations at that point. So that's how he was diagnosed, and that our knowledge of his food allergy was much more detailed because he was part of this clinical trial that did a large observational study on what he was allergic to in a bigger scale.
I think it's important to say here, I'm assuming based on the things you've said, you've had this first one where he had these food sensitivities, food allergies as an infant. I'm assuming that with your second and third child, you just went to your regular diet to breastfeed them.
Right.
No restriction.
No restrictions, especially because I had a child in between these 2 food allergy children that didn't have any issues. So I did not on my own, or I was not recommended to restrict my diet when I was breastfeeding either of them. So the second child actually wound up having similar food sensitivities to the first, where it was dairy, wheat, egg, and it was also peanut.
Hey, what age did you figure that out, would you say?
It was right around that time we were enrolled in a study where they tested him for pretty much everything. And that's how we discovered that it was peanut. And then when I removed those items from my diet breastfeeding, then his symptoms improved quite a bit, right? Mm. And I have to say, in this study that he was enrolled in, which was an observational study, we didn't give him anything except the regular recommendations to avoid these things in his diet as per the allergist. They actually discovered from this study the high likelihood that children were going to outgrow certain food allergies by the age of 5. So what we saw in my first child is what the study actually concluded. And it was so successful in those first 5 years of life that they extended the study to a 10-year study. So this one child was part of this study for 10 years.
Okay, and how did you manage his food allergies then? Initially, you take those things out of the breast milk.
Right. And then we did not introduce those foods to his diet when we introduced solids. And that was based on the allergist's recommendation at that time and testing that they had done to indicate how allergic he was to things. So your recommendations, if your child has food allergies, can be drastically different. And I do want to make a side comment here that today's recommendations will often be based on your allergist's approval to start introducing allergenic foods in small amounts. They usually call it the ladder, where they kind of step up a ladder of introduction of foods. And if they're very cautious, they would even introduce that food for the first time in the allergist's office, and they call that a food challenge. So these are not things to be done at home on your own. And if my child was born today, the allergy recommendations might be different based on the study that he was in. But at that time, it was recommended that we restrict.
Okay. And so I'm envisioning you have this home where you now have 2 toddlers and this baby. Well, and you have your mom and you and your husband. You have all these people of different ages in your home, some of whom are more and less vigilant about food allergy exposure for your son. So what does that look like in your home?
Yeah. So ultimately, I think it wasn't hard to do the dairy, the initial food allergy, because we're doing a lot of feeding ourselves. We did puree feeding. So it was just kind of set aside the baby food and that's what the baby eats. But it does change in a household once the baby starts eating the same food as the parents, and once there's snacks and grabbing of different foods. That does have a shift in the home. And there are a lot of parents out there, if they have one child that's allergic to peanuts, they may just opt to make a peanut-free household. Even though the other family members aren't allergic to peanuts, just that risk of grabbing something, feeding something, cross-contamination with something can be a lot of stress on a parent that they just would rather just kind of not have that allergen in their house at all.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
But for us, our older son wasn't allergic to nuts, and it was one of the only things he could eat. So we kept nuts as part of our pantry. And then later it was discovered, as my child outgrew certain allergies, this third one, and continued to be allergic to other things, he continued to be allergic to the peanut and certain tree nuts. Although the wheat, the dairy, and the egg, he grew out of those 3. So ultimately, I want to describe to our listeners what it may look like in your home. You're either a parent who is rightfully fearful of food allergy and anaphylaxis and EpiPen, and you're hypervigilant about everything that goes into that child's mouth, about every food that's in your home. You're forced to be this really paranoid parent when it comes to food allergy and making sure that it doesn't happen at all. Or you're the parent who isn't super hypervigilant, which not everyone can be. And honestly, I was not one of those parents. And you occasionally make a mistake where the food that they're allergic to, for some reason they ingest it, and then you have this extreme feeling of guilt, right? So you're literally either this crazy hypervigilant parent or this parent that makes an understandable mistake with a ton of guilt because you did that. And that is what it's like sometimes living with food allergy in your home.
So I'm curious, do you have any stories of, were there mistakes with your child?
Like I said earlier, we lived in a household, even though I had a peanut allergic kid, we did not have a peanut-free household. In fact, for some periods of time for my other children, that peanut butter jelly sandwich was the go-to lunch item. So you can see this dilemma where you might be dealing with one child who might be a little bit picky at that time that eats only the food that your other child is allergic to, right? This happens. This is the reality of having a household with multiple children. and I would make their sandwiches. And it was confusing, and I don't recommend all parents do this, but this is how we had to cope, where we made peanut butter jelly for some of our kids in elementary, whereas the other child would get like an almond or a sunflower seed butter sandwich. So they kind of pretty much look the same, but they're different. And as parents, as we're preparing, on separate cutting boards and knives and everything, we would slice the peanut butter jelly sandwiches in the middle and the sunflower seed sandwiches on the diagonal. So there was that extra level of security or double check that if he had a sandwich that was cut the wrong way, he was not going to eat it, and this is kind of like that balance between hypervigilance versus making mistakes. And this was one of those in-between checks that we had. And I remember going to work one day, and this happens to parents all the time. As you're driving to work, all the kids finally out the door. I'm getting to work, probably late on my part. It dawned on me on my drive there that I had switched their lunch boxes.
Oh, no.
Like it was this, oh my gosh, I put his sandwich in her box and her sandwich in his box. I called that school in desperation. And honestly, I was like, I have these two kids in these two grades and their lunch boxes are switched and they are allergic, right? Like high alert. I hate putting it on the school at that point, but it was like that panic where, oh my gosh, I've prepared the wrong lunches, and that I just want parents to know I'm a pediatrician mom, and those mistakes happen, not often, and we had good systems in place, but it happens, and it happened to me, and fortunately it all worked out and I actually noticed. But if that ever happened and my one child, both children would know that a mistake was made, right? Like if the child who was supposed to have the peanut sandwich had the diagonal crossed sandwich, that child knew that they had the wrong sandwich and that their allergic sibling had the wrong sandwich, right?
Right. Your allergic child will never eat any sandwich cut into rectangles ever.
Ever, right? Like this is what we do. So there's a lot of regular challenges that parents that don't have food allergy kids deal with their children day to day. And we've highlighted some of these in previous episodes and plan on highlighting some more of them in future episodes. But like the picky eater, if you can imagine your child is a picky eater and they have food allergy, first of all, you're almost justifying why they're picky, because they have this allergic reaction to foods. They're cautious when it comes to new foods, different textures and tastes. It almost lends to being a picky eater when you have a food allergy kid. Another thing that people don't think of as an additional challenge is sleeping. As we said earlier, eczema is not always food allergy, and food allergy isn't always eczema, but sometimes it is, and it was for my kids. And as they're scratching and itching, it makes sleeping difficult because they're itchy at night or they wake up at night being itchy. And that adds this addition to the sleep problems that your kids could have just normally during that toddler bed transition or sleeping through the night as an infant. That adds another layer to that. For us personally, because the eczema component was related to the food allergy in our case, the regular routines of bathing and nighttime routine, there was a whole nother layer of skincare and emollients and creams, and that whole routine just prolonged every bedtime routine for us. Not difficult, but just that additional layer that made it just a little bit harder. And for me, especially with my first child, there was some concerns about growth. As they get picky, as they're afraid to eat new foods, their repertoire is very small, and then add a layer of they're not growing as well or gaining weight as much as they should, then it's like, what do I do now? They're already picky. They can't eat all these foods, good, yummy foods that I want to introduce because of their allergy. How do I feed this child? How do I make this child grow? It is a stressor on parents, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me want to ask you too, what about the stressors as well of like going out to eat, traveling,
Right.
preschool, school
Yeah.
lunch. Like, how did you find it worked best for you to navigate that with your children?
Yeah, those are great questions. I mean, let's talk about going out to eat first. For a
Yeah.
lot of parents, that's like a respite from cooking. I've been at work all day, let's go out to eat. Every parent experiences that. And going out to eat or ordering out, DoorDash or even Grubhub, that can be a way of kind of easing parental stress in general from the day to day. But for us, that just added another layer of stress. Like, what's in this food? How do they make this food? It was just not worth it. He wound up really never going out to eat because of this fear of food allergy and cross-contamination. And it did put the burden of at-home food prep on our family pretty much for every single meal. You mentioned traveling.
Traveling. Yeah.
Yes, even when they were younger, not just the stress of, oh, what if they have an allergic reaction when we're not home? That stress of like bringing food, like there was this whole repertoire of foods that I knew he could eat that I would have to pack and bring whenever we went traveling, because what if we couldn't find those brands where we were going? What if the restaurant didn't have anything that he could eat because we're traveling and eating out? Like, I wanted to have a whole suitcase full of food that I knew that I could feed my child while we were going. And there was also that stress of like, we're in an unfamiliar place, and this lends to the picky, but it's not picky eating. They're just like afraid to eat different or new food.
Well, I have to add, I mean, I know about you that you were very ambitious in road tripping and camping. And so I appreciate all of these extra steps that you took, and we're still able to create these really memorable times for your family.
I mean, that is an example of how your child with food allergies, childhood experiences can shrink
Yeah.
because of fear and exposure. Like normal things like a trip, like a camping trip, things you want to do with your children to show them the world. Some parents feel very hesitant and it just becomes smaller and smaller and they're unwilling to leave the house. And I don't blame them. That's a hard decision to make, right?
It is. I am thankful that over the past 2 decades, there's been so much more awareness built around this. And I certainly know my friends and patients with food allergy who have gotten so good at knowing these locations, these hotel brands, these
Right.
entertainment brands. I know that if we plan our vacation around these, I trust the food that we're ordering for my child. So I can appreciate when parents do it from that angle too. And I'm thankful there's so many more options now.
Right.
I want to talk preschool and then going into like school age where they're packing a lunch. Yeah.
Yeah. So in preschool, I remember being very, very nervous in this child. And I wound up picking a preschool that was nut-free just to kind of eliminate that fear of what could happen in that preschool setting when they're not fully aware that they should be avoiding. And I also chose a preschool that was nut-free in conjunction that had like a lower school, like an elementary school, in a separate area. But because of that, this preschool had access to a school nurse
Yeah. Yeah.
on site. But for me, as like a food allergy kid in my child's first experience eating snack and a packed lunch away from home at preschool, I just felt so much better knowing that it was a nut-free school and then there was a school nurse, like an RN on site, that knew about my child and could keep an eye on them. So for me, those were the types of things that I needed in order to feel okay with that. And I fully understand that those might not be accessible to all parents, and parents do make different decisions on that.
Yeah, I also appreciate all of the kind of creative hacks parents over the years have come with to try to help with this, like the, stickers that they'll put on their child's back every day saying, please don't feed me anything due to my food allergies, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit older. I mean, because I'm assuming that once your child was in elementary school, they're no longer at a completely peanut-free space. What did you start doing then?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of education involved. Like, you want to make sure that they're aware of their allergy. And for some families where the mistake has never been made, kudos to you, the child doesn't even know how severe it can be. So you're trying to bestow this extreme level of caution in your child as they're navigating eating at the lunch table on their own without making them anxious and paranoid about it. It's hard to thread that needle, right? It's hard to make them appropriately concerned without terrified.
As you're saying that, I can imagine if I have a child who is very high anxiety, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, who's already expressing to me fear about this or fear about attending to school, my talk track with them errs on the side of, you know the rules, you know how to avoid these foods. If you follow them, you're going to be safe. And if anything happens, this is who you go to. I can imagine, on the other hand, if I have a 6 or 7-year-old child who is like completely carefree, like will, oh, I want to try that. Like, oh, okay, you're offering me part of your lunch. Sure. Like, has no anxiety at all about their food allergy, that my talk track is more geared to, in this situation, if somebody offers you a food and it has your allergen in it, this is not going to go well. Like, I'm like tempering my level of severity based on my child's personality, right? That only I as the parent could know. So I can see how this is very difficult as to how to advise parents to talk to their children.
Mm-hmm. And then having your allergy action plan, like a lot of schools will require written instruction by your doctor or allergist, what symptoms we're looking for, when we give certain medicines, when we call 911. These are standard parts of an allergy action plan in the school setting. So everybody is on board on what the allergen is, what the exposure may look like, and what we do step by step if that happens, with medication in hand with the form, so they have the medicine that your child needs in the unlikely event that the ingestion occurs in school.
Yeah, actually, that's such a good point, that the school is becoming your trusted ally and resource in this. And any information that you can give them about your child is there to help them in the event that they need to intervene for your child.
And I encourage parents who need more reassurance, meet with that school nurse at school. Have a discussion. That's what they're there for, is to care for your child's illnesses and chronic diseases when the child is not in your care. And touch base with the nurse. Give them a heads up that morning if something seemed unusual. Just be in contact. They're part of your care team, and I would encourage parents to utilize them to help you and to reassure you.
No, that's really well said. Are there thoughts on nut-free tables?
Yeah, so my children went to public school, so there was a peanut-free table available in the elementary school lunchroom. This is the time where kids may eat each other's foods, and I can see the need for that. And that decision did come into play for me. But as you're balancing all of the developmental things that are happening in your child at that age, the peanut-free table in our elementary school was very lonely and isolated. If your child was the only child in the grade, sitting in the peanut-free table, they were alone every day eating lunch. And for us, we gauged the level of hypervigilance that our child had, the risk of exposure. He was very alert and aware. We weren't required to sit there in our school system, but we decided as a family that we were not going to put our child at the peanut-free table. He ate lunch with his friends in his class every year, and he knew that he was allergic to these foods and could be responsible about it. So I was very grateful for that option in our school system.
Yeah. Well, I love your stories. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I know so many parents out there can relate and probably feel a comfort that even you, who have been so exceptionally well trained in the management of food allergies, both at home and medically, still have these stressors that are common to parents that are dealing with this.
This was a fun episode for me to look back on food allergy and also kind of see how far we've come. For those listeners who didn't have a chance to listen to our first episode on food allergy, where we really go through recommendations and, more like a clinical way of thinking about it to begin with, I highly recommend going back and listening to that episode. But there are also other resources out there. I love the healthychildren.org webpage that is powered by the AAP. They have some great info sheets, web pages on food allergy. That is a great first place to start. And if you have any concerns or questions about food allergy or how to advance the diet or mistakes that have been made, I encourage you to speak with your primary care provider or allergist and decide what's best for your child in their particular situation.
Well, this is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin.
And I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank. See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.